You told yourself it wouldn't happen again, that this time you'd be stronger, that this time you'd notice the signs, stop yourself at the door of disappointment and choose your own peace instead. But you didn't. You let him in. And worse than that, you let him back in. He didn't just knock. He didn't plead. He didn't prove. He simply appeared, hollow and familiar, and you opened the door with the same wounded hands that once swore they'd never reach again. And now here you are, again, hurting in the same places, silently rehearsing the same questions, wondering if you're foolish or faithful, asking yourself how a heart so loyal can feel so used. You wanted to believe he changed, that something about time, distance, or loneliness might have carved a new shape in him. You hoped that the silence had taught him what your presence never could, that maybe your absence was loud enough to echo. But no, he came back wearing a new mask, but speaking the same language, the language of absence, of confusion, of almost love. And you, despite everything you've learned, despite all the promises whispered into your pillow, you answered. You leaned in, you softened when you should have stood still. But this isn't a story of blame. This isn't where we shame the version of you that still hoped. No, this is where we understand her, where we meet her, trembling and tender, sitting at the edge of her intuition, begging it to lie. Because love, especially unreturned love, doesn't leave wounds, it leaves mirrors. And every time you let him back in, you weren't just letting him return, you were letting back in the unhealed version of you, the girl who thought love could be earned by endurance, the woman who thought silence meant mystery and not manipulation. You didn't love him. You loved who you became around him, the one who gave, the one who stayed, the one who waited just long enough to lose herself but never long enough to be loved back. And that's the real grief, isn't it? Not that he lied, but that you needed the lie, that you were so desperate to make the story beautiful, that you stayed for every ugly chapter. You reread his apologies like scripture, ignored the margins soaked in warning signs, and called his bare minimum a blessing. But now there's a shift. You feel it, don't you? It's quiet. It's not angry. It doesn't scream, but it's there. That silent knowing, that final breathless realization, he didn't change. You did. You no longer beg for crumbs because you've started to taste your own worth. You no longer silence your intuition because her voice is finally louder than your fear of abandonment. And the version of you who once thought this was love, she's waking up. He will regret it. Not because you plan revenge, not because you'll show him your glow-up, not because you'll force him to see what he lost. No, he'll regret it in the silence, in the places where your softness once stood, where your words once waited, where your forgiveness once flowed. He will regret it when the void you filled becomes louder than his ego can bear. But let's be honest, that regret won't save you. It won't heal you. It won't restore what his confusion cost you, because his regret is not your redemption. Your redemption is this moment, this awakening, the realization that loving someone doesn't mean saving them, that compassion, without boundaries, is self-abandonment, that you were never supposed to mother a man into maturity. He was a lesson dressed as a soulmate, a karmic echo of your younger wounds. He showed you where you still craved validation, where you still believed you had to earn attention. He mirrored your unmet needs, not because he was your fate, but because he was your feedback. And the pain you feel now, that raw ache that keeps you checking your phone, replaying old messages, questioning your sanity, that's not weakness, that's detox, that's the unraveling of illusions you once called love. You stir not broken, you stir breaking patterns. And the version of you who keeps saying, "Why did I let him do this again?" She's not naive, she's brave, because she's still here, listening, learning, untangling herself from the very story she once believed was her only way to feel wanted. There is no shame in loving deeply. The shame is in staying shallow for someone who refuses to swim toward you. So let him go, not with rage, but with reverence. Not because he deserves it, but because you do. You deserve to release the burden of potential, to forgive yourself for holding on so long, to bless the path that broke you, because it also brought you here, to the mirror, to the truth. And one day, not today, not tomorrow, but someday, he'll feel it. Not your absence, but your evolution. Not your silence, but your self-respect. He'll look for the version of you that bent, that waited, that forgave, and she will be gone, replaced not by a colder woman, but by a clearer one. You'll be somewhere new, not in location, but in soul. Because once a woman truly sees herself, she stops begging others to, and that is what he shall regret forever. You didn't choose to fall, you chose to believe, and that belief, the quiet, aching faith that maybe this time would be different, is what kept you tethered to someone who never held the rope. You weren't blind, you saw every red flag. But love, real love, or what you thought was real, has a way of turning those flags into warnings you convince yourself you can heal through. You didn't ignore the truth, you just thought you could outlove the pain. Because somewhere deep in your memory, long before this man, long before this love, you learned that affection was something you had to earn. You watched people leave, you watched people change. You learned that being enough was always conditional, tied to performance, perfection, patience, and so when you met him, and he gave just enough to stir hope, but never enough to make you feel safe, your nervous system said, "This feels familiar." Not good, not kind, just familiar. And the familiar is seductive. It wears the face of nostalgia. It sounds like home, even when it hurts. So when he hurt you the first time, it wasn't just heartbreak, it was confirmation, proof of something ancient inside you, the belief that you must be the problem, that you weren't good enough to make someone stay. So you tried harder. You smiled wider, you became quieter. You softened even when you were breaking. You traded truth for tolerance. You abandoned your boundaries not because you lacked strength, but because you thought love meant sacrifice. And every time he disappointed you, you made excuses. Not because you were weak, but because your hope was louder than your hurt. You convinced yourself he just needed time, space, healing. You projected your own empathy onto someone who only knew how to take. But he never asked for your healing. He just learned how to rest inside it. And now you're left holding pieces of a love that only you were trying to build. You tell yourself, he's not all bad, and you're right, he isn't. But that's what makes it harder, because he wasn't cruel every day. Some days he made you laugh. Some nights he held you like you were the only thing keeping him from falling apart, and you believed him, because you wanted to, because you needed to. You needed to believe that this wasn't another hollow echo of a wound you've carried since childhood. But here's what you must know, not everyone who touches your soul is meant to stay. Some arrive not as partners, but as mirrors, messengers, lessons dressed in charm and chemistry. And now the lesson is burning its way into your memory. You don't just miss him, you miss who you were when he first looked at you like you were magic. You miss the version of yourself that hadn't yet seen the truth, the girl who still believed this love would save her. But the truth is, you were never being saved. You were being broken, not out of cruelty, but out of necessity. Because sometimes the soul needs shattering to wake up. And that's where you are now, in the in-between, not healed, not destroyed, just waking up. Your clarity is raw. It hurts. You still check your phone. You still hope for that message. You still wonder if he's thinking of you. But every time he doesn't reach out, every time he ignores your silence, every time he posts like nothing happened, you learn, not about him, but about yourself. You learn what love is not. It is not confusion. It is not anxiety. It is not waiting for someone to choose you. It is not holding your breath. You were never asking for too much. You were just asking the wrong person. He wasn't incapable of love. He was incapable of your kind of love, the kind that requires presence, responsibility, intimacy. And deep down, you knew that's what hurts the most. You knew, you felt it in your body, in your chest, in the silence between texts, in the way he changed when he had your heart and no longer needed to earn it. But you stayed, not because you lacked self-respect, but because you had too much hope. That hope is not something to be ashamed of. It is sacred. It means your soul still believes in connection. But now that hope must be redirected, not toward him, but toward you. Toward the woman you are becoming. She doesn't beg for love, she embodies it. She doesn't chase closure, she becomes it. He will think of you when the silence grows too loud, when his distractions no longer distract, when he reaches for someone new and realizes the depth is missing. He will think of the way you listened, the way you held space, the way you forgave even before he apologized. He will remember the version of himself he got to be with you, not because he earned it, but because you offered it. And then he will realize that version is gone, because you are not there to hold it anymore. But this realization will not come when you want it to. It will not come when you're crying in your bed, hoping he sees your worth. It will come when you no longer care. When your glow is no longer curated to show him what he missed, but is simply a byproduct of your peace. That is when he will regret, not the loss of you, but the loss of the chance to meet you in your wholeness. And by then, he will be just another ghost, a faded lesson, a name you no longer whisper when you talk to God. You will not need him to regret it, because you will have already forgiven yourself, not for loving him, but for forgetting yourself to do so. And that forgiveness that is your freedom. There's a strange silence that comes after a goodbye you never got to say. The kind of silence that doesn't echo, it lingers, it crawls into your chest and waits. Not because you need him to speak, but because a part of you still believes he might. You keep replaying the moments, not just the arguments or the disappointments, but the in-betweens, the small kindnesses, the nights where you swore his eyes held the truth, the morning he kissed your forehead, the message he sent that sounded like he finally saw you. You hold those fragments like they're proof that it wasn't all in your head, proof that he felt it too. But the mind, when in pain, can make monuments out of crumbs, and you've been starving for so long that you began to mistake those crumbs for a feast. That's what happens when love is inconsistent. It turns you into a scavenger. It teaches you to find meaning in scraps, to romanticize the bare minimum, to praise the rare instead of questioning the lack. You kept thinking, if he could just go back to the way he was, but that version of him never truly existed. He was who he was in the beginning because he hadn't yet secured your heart, and when he knew he had it, he no longer needed to perform. That's not love. That's control. And what you called connection was often just your trauma dancing with his avoidance, because you weren't drawn to him out of fate. You were drawn out of familiarity, and familiar wounds call to us like home, until we awaken. That awakening, it doesn't come like thunder. It comes slowly, painfully, quietly. It looks like nights where the crying finally stops, not because you're better, but because you're exhausted. It looks like the first day you don't check your phone, like the moment you stop planning what you'll say if he reaches out, the moment you realize you have nothing left to prove. Not to him, not to anyone, not even to yourself, because love was never supposed to be a performance. It was supposed to be a presence, and you were the only one who kept showing up. You dressed your wounds in forgiveness. You stitched his silence into hope. You turned your needs into apologies, and every time he hurt you, you blamed yourself for feeling the pain. But now, you're done, not angry, not bitter, just done. And that's what he never expected. He thought you'd stay, because you always did. He thought he could return again, because you always let him. He believed your love was infinite because he never saw the cost. He never saw the pieces of yourself you gave away to make room for his chaos. But you remember the conversations you rehearsed in your head but never said aloud, the boundaries you wanted to set but swallowed, the nights you couldn't sleep because his words didn't match his actions, the parts of yourself you silenced just to keep him from leaving. But he left anyway. Emotionally, physically, spiritually. He left even while standing next to you, and you stayed. Not because you were weak, but because you were loyal to a fault, to your own detriment. But that loyalty, unreciprocated, became your cage. You weren't loved, you were used, and now you're finally facing that truth, not with shame, but with compassion. Because the woman you were, she was doing her best, loving with everything she had, hoping with everything she lost. She didn't deserve what happened, but she does deserve what comes next. Peace, clarity, closure, not from him, but from within. Because the wound isn't his name. The wound is the story. The belief that you weren't enough, that you had to fight for someone to choose you. That belief is the shadow, the invisible thread tying you to people who reflect your doubt instead of your worth. And it's that shadow that you're now confronting. You see it in your reflection, in the ache that doesn't leave, in the way you flinch when someone new shows you affection, because now you're afraid to trust, not just others, yourself. You're afraid to believe your intuition, because last time you did, it led you into pain. But here's the truth. It wasn't your intuition that failed you, it was your hope that overrode your knowing. And now the knowing is louder. It's saying, you don't need to be chosen to be valuable. It's whispering, the right one will not confuse you. It's reminding you, you don't have to lose yourself to feel loved. And still the grief comes in waves. That's okay. Healing is not a straight line. Some days you'll feel free, others you'll feel foolish. Some nights you'll remember his voice and wonder if you imagined it all, but you didn't. What you felt was real to you, but not everything real is right. Not everything deep is divine. Some connections exist only to break us open, to show us where we still bleed. And he, the man you thought was your healing, was actually your mirror. He reflected the part of you that still thought you had to earn safety. He mirrored your belief that love is struggle. But now you're breaking that mirror. You're choosing to no longer see yourself through the eyes of someone who never truly saw you. You're letting go. Not because you stopped loving, but because you started listening to your heart, to your nervous system, to the silence inside you that's been begging for peace. You don't want him back, you want yourself back. And that's what this journey is, the slow, sacred return, the unraveling of every false story, the rewriting of every scar. And when he reaches for you again, and he will, you won't respond with anger, you won't respond at all, because you'll be somewhere he cannot go. A place where you no longer translate silence into mystery, a place where your value is not a question, a place where his regret is irrelevant. There is something sacred in silence, not the kind he gave you, cold, manipulative, uncertain, but the kind that arrives after closure with yourself, the kind that doesn't ache, the kind that sits gently in your bones and whispers, you're done performing. You're no longer the woman who waits by the phone, who bends her boundaries in hopes that someone will finally treat her like she matters, who questions her worth because someone else couldn't recognize it. You're not that woman anymore, and though you miss pieces of her, her softness, her hope, her belief in love so pure it could fix anything, you also know she had to die for you to be reborn. That's the part people don't understand about heartbreak. It's not just the end of a relationship, it's the death of a version of you, the girl who stayed, the woman who believed, the part of your soul that was still waiting for someone to come back and love her properly. That girl didn't just get hurt, she got rewritten. And that rewriting, it's not loud, it's not glamorous, It's lonely. It's full of days where nothing makes sense. Mornings where you wake up hoping the pain is finally gone, only to find it sitting at the foot of your bed like a familiar ghost. Nights where your pillow carries more memories than rest. But slowly you start to change. Not all at once. Not in some grand cinematic moment. But in small ways. You don't reread the old messages as much. You stop stalking his page. You start talking to yourself with a little more kindness. And that's the true return. Not to love, but to yourself. Because before him, you had wounds. But with him, those wounds were reopened. Not by force, but by familiarity. He didn't break you. He revealed where you were already bleeding. Where the little girl inside of you was still asking, "Am I enough?" And now, you don't need him to answer that. Because you are learning to answer it for yourself. He doesn't know the kind of love he lost. He never did. That's the thing about men like him. They don't understand the value of devotion until they feel its absence. He didn't feel your presence as a gift. He saw it as a guarantee. And now with you gone, he's not just losing access to you, he's losing access to the mirror that made him feel whole. Because you didn't just love him. You reflected back to him the parts of himself he wanted to believe in. You were his safe space, his redemption, his illusion that he was better than his behavior. But you are not a mirror anymore. You are a window, and the only thing you reflect now is light. He will miss you. Not just your body, not just your laugh, not just the way you made excuses for him when everyone else gave up. He will miss the way you made him feel like a man he never earned the right to be. He will miss the way you softened his flaws into potential, the way you held space for the boy inside of him that still didn't know how to love. But he will miss you too late, because by the time he realizes what you were, you will no longer need him to. And this is your evolution. You are not healing to be loved again. You are healing so that next time you won't mistake your empathy for compatibility, so that next time you won't confuse being needed with being cherished, so that next time you don't fall for the fantasy, you honor the reality. You are not building walls, you are building discernment. You are not becoming cold, you are becoming clear. Because you finally understand, love does not require suffering, it does not ask you to shrink. It does not play hide and seek with your intuition. Love may be hard, but it is not confusing, and you deserve clarity. You deserve mornings where you don't second-guess someone's words. Evenings where you don't rewrite reality to make someone look better than they behaved. You deserve someone whose presence doesn't make you question your instincts. Someone who doesn't punish your sensitivity, who doesn't run when things get real. Someone who sees your depth, not as a burden, but as a sacred invitation to grow. But first, you must see that in yourself. And that's what this pain is. A sacred initiation. A reckoning with your shadow. A final goodbye to the version of you that thought love was about proving your worth. And this time you don't rise for him. You rise for you. Not to show him what he lost, but to reclaim what you gave away. The parts of you that waited, that wondered, that held your breath every time he pulled away. Those parts are coming home. And with every moment you don't reach out, you are rewiring your soul. This is what real healing looks like. Not a straight line, not a motivational quote, but 1,000 tiny decisions to not betray yourself again. And each one of those decisions, it is your freedom, it is your redemption, it is the regret he will carry. But the peace you will keep. You've been walking with the ache for so long that it started to feel like part of you, like your ribs were shaped around it, like your breath had to move around it just to keep going. Grief becomes a rhythm like that, not always loud, but always there. It hides in your quiet moments, in songs that used to mean nothing, in places you didn't expect, like the way you sit in silence at red lights, the way you grip your coffee cup too tight, the way your hand still hesitates over his name in your phone, even though it's been weeks, maybe months since he last reached out. And still, part of you waits, Not for him, for the version of you who finally stops waiting, the woman who doesn't flinch when love disappears, who doesn't make excuses for someone else's absence, who doesn't crave being chosen by someone who never saw her clearly. She's in you. She always has been, but she's quiet, because pain taught her to whisper. But she sits starting to speak. She sits starting to rise. And every time you choose silence over chasing, every time you choose truth over fantasy, every time you honor your boundaries instead of begging for his breadcrumbs, you feed her, you make her stronger, you become her, and she is unstoppable, not because she never hurts, but because she's finally done hurting herself. You see, it wasn't just him, that's the hardest part to face, that you were part of it. Not the cause, but the continuation. You kept the cycle alive because you didn't know how to grieve the version of love you thought you needed. You confused attention with affection, chaos with passion. You were addicted to the hope that maybe, just maybe, this time he'd stay, and so you stayed. Even after he left emotionally, even after he shut you out, even after the silence became louder than the love. But now you know that staying doesn't make you loyal, it makes you disappear. And you sit tired of disappearing. That exhaustion, that weariness in your soul, that's the turning point. The body knows before the mind does. It gets tired of shrinking, of twisting, of interpreting mixed signals as signs from the universe, of replaying moments, decoding words, waiting for signs that never come. Your body remembers every time you were confused, but convinced yourself you just needed to be more patient. Every time you were anxious, but convinced yourself it was just overthinking. But it wasn't it. That was your knowing. That was your deeper self saying, this is not love. Love doesn't feel like walking on eggshells. It doesn't make you question your worth every other day. It doesn't disappear when it's inconvenient. Love stays. Love holds. Love shows up when it's hard. And if he couldn't do that, then what you had wasn't love. It was longing dressed in proximity. It was attachment mistaken for fate. And now, you're unraveling it all, slowly, painfully, with shaking hands and a breaking heart. But you stir doing it. You're walking through the fire without reaching back for the hands that lit the match. And that is everything. That is where healing begins. Not when the pain stops, but when you stop abandoning yourself to numb it. He doesn't know what you're becoming. He couldn't even recognize who you were when you were at your softest. And now, he's losing access to the version of you he didn't even know was rare. The version who forgave without apology, who waited without assurance, who stayed loyal to someone who was loyal only to their comfort. And that's what he'll feel. Not your absence, but your elevation. Not your silence, but your sovereignty. Not your goodbye, but the echo of everything he took for granted. He will scroll through people who remind him of you, hoping to recreate what he only half appreciated when he had it. But they won't be you. They won't know the story behind your eyes. They won't understand the way you gave love. Not as a transaction, but as a calling. And one day, he'll remember. Not because he misses what you did for him, but because he'll miss who he got to be around you. Because with you, he felt safe. He felt seen. He felt seen. He felt whole. Not because he was, but because you lent him your light. But you sit taking it back now. And that's not cruel. That's sacred. That's holy. That's the act of a woman who finally understands that saving someone else is not the same as being loved. That being needed is not the same as being cherished. That pain is not the price of belonging. So breathe, not because it doesn't hurt, but because the hurt means you're alive again. It means the numbness is lifting. It means the part of you that got lost in him is finding her way back home. This is your return, not to who you were before him, but to the version of you that always knew you deserved more. So now, here you are, not broken but reborn, not bitter but aware. You let him hurt you again, And maybe that's the part that still haunts you at night. But this time, something changed. You didn't stay broken, you didn't run back, you didn't beg. You stood in the fire and let it burn away every illusion you once called love. And when the smoke cleared, there you were, clearer, stronger, undeniable. He'll regret it, yes. Not in the way you imagined, but in the way that cuts deepest. In the quiet, in the spaces you used to fill with your love, your softness, your forgiveness. When he reaches for that version of you again, he will find nothing but absence. And that absence will echo louder than your presence ever did. Let him wonder, let him ache, let him carry the weight of what he couldn't hold. But you walk on with grace, with truth, with yourself, because this time you didn't lose him. This time you finally chose you, and that is something he shall never ever get back.